Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us tonight for our next installment of the Feline Education Series. Today, we're going to be talking about building confidence and being an advocate or becoming an advocate for our feline friends. If you don't know me, I am Jennifer Rosen, Volunteer Program Manager. I also have Allie Bradley, Volunteer Program Coordinator for the Mackey Center in Roseville PetSmart, joining us today. Allie, you want to say hi?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining with us.
Allie is going to be kind of helping us monitor things behind the scenes. So if you have any questions today, please go ahead and put those in the chat throughout. We're going to be saving questions for the end, although there are a couple interactive parts in the presentation today. So we will let you know where those are, and you can come off mute or write in the chat at that time. So please, please, please interact with us. We'd love to hear what you have to say. And last but not least, our special guest joining us today, Victoria, one of our lovely volunteers. Victoria, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Victoria. I'm so excited to be here and talk about this program today. It's really exciting to see all of you here. And I've worked with some of you in the shelter, and you're doing really great with your enrichment with the cats. So keep up the good work.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Victoria, for joining me today to help present. She's actually going to be a co-presenter. So it's both me and Victoria today, and we look forward to sharing this information with you. And with that, we'll go ahead and we will get started. All right. So today's objectives, we're going to be talking about fear and what causes it. We'll talk about fear in both the home and shelter environment. So, a little bit for our friends who maybe are working with foster animals or pets of your own. We really want this information to be useful by everybody or useful for everybody. How do we help cats be the best versions of themselves? That's really the important takeaway. We all can play a role in that. So, we'll be talking a little bit about that today and the other ways that volunteers support. We know that maybe you can't foster, maybe you can't come on site to support our kitty cats. So, what can you do? What can you do from your home? What are the other ways that you can give back to take care of our feline friends and make sure you are being an advocate? Those are all things we're going to discuss today, as well as doing questions and answers at the end. So don't forget, use that chat, write them down so you don't forget, because we want to be able to get to the questions that you have. All right. So we love to start every presentation off with this statement. It feels really important and near and dear to our hearts now, but we all have a responsibility to keep shelter animals happy and healthy during their stay. Happy and healthy as possible. And why? Why? Because we are their caretakers, right? We are those advocates. They don't always have a voice. So we are there doing what we can. And sometimes that means getting out of our human brain, because yes, we really, really want to help them, but making sure we're thinking of things from the animal's perspective. So that's some of the stuff we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how things happen in the animal's body and what we can do to make them comfortable. So, what is fear? Fear is an emotional response.
So we're going to consider a little bit more about how that emotional response is triggered by the perception of a threat. And a cat is overwhelmed or stressed by something that they see, a stimulus that is unusual to them, and it causes this fear response. It could be, think of their senses, their sight, their smell, strangers that they see in the shelter or in a new environment, or smells, sounds that they hear. All these unusual stimuli cause an automatic physiological change in the body of the cat. We see there's an increase in the hormone cortisol, which also can cause increase in glucose that's released. Adrenaline is released, and these chemicals actually help the animal to be alert and be ready to decide, is this a friend or a foe that I'm in front of? And do I have to flee from them? Fight or flight, we're going to talk a little bit more about. We also see an increase in the heart rate, increase in blood pressure. Perhaps there's urination or defecation that happens. And when you look at this picture here, this little fearful kitty there, dilated pupils, the cat is crouching down on the floor, legs close, tail tucked in. ears are flat. Again, those wide open eyes, mouth is tight. The animal is trying to decide, am I going to stay or am I going to go? So we're going to talk a little bit more about the benefits of fear. But when we have a cat is exposed to something that caused fear for too long, we're going to talk about how that can be detrimental to the cat.
Awesome. Thank you, Vicki. So what is fear? Continuing on with that, it's a behavioral response to keep the animal safe, right? So fear is actually a really good thing. It's something that bodies have developed over way longer than we've been here to help keep an animal safe. So there are four ways that that can happen. The first is fight. The second way is flight. So again, if you think of those, fight, okay, the animal is going to do something to keep themselves safe. Flight, they're running away, so it's also an action. Fawning, that might be something we're not as familiar with, but that's the animal trying to maybe appease us or make us happy. We're the threat, right? So they're trying to show that they're not scary, and hopefully that big scary thing will go away. Or freeze, right? That's when an animal or even a human, right? We experience these emotions or these behavioral responses as well. It's not moving. We are so scared. Our body can't even, the only thing they can do is just stay completely still. Victoria, do you want to add to that?
I think all of us have seen these different reactions in our cats, haven't we? And sometimes we're mistaken. We think that when a cat is freezing and shut down, that, oh, they're used to us, being with us. They like this petting, but it might not be so. We really have to kind of consider the body language and what the cat is really feeling.
So the way I like to think about it, behavioral equals taking action. That means something is happening. The body is going to have an actual response. They're going to move. They're going to freeze. The cat might swat at us, right? That's the fighting, hissing, growling, running away, making their body smaller in their cages if we're at the shelter, hiding in their litter pan. Um, Fawning is, I see it a little less with cats, but if we think about dogs, that's where they're trying to crawl up in your lap and sometimes cuddle closer to you, or they roll over and give that belly. And freezing, again, I'm glad you elaborated on that one. That's again where they're staying still and they're letting us touch it, even though they might not like it. So it's the body actually doing something, like taking a physical action where physiological, the cat can't control it. They're not making a decision. It's just happening. Their blood pressure is rising, right? The cortisol is releasing in their body. The cat doesn't have an actual thought like, I think I'm going to raise the cortisol in my body. They can't control it. It's an autonomic response, automatic. Their body just does it. It's built into us, hardwired. It's the same way where we start sweating if we get nervous, right? Humans do that. Cats don't sweat, but they're going to maybe start panting. Dogs do that too sometimes when they're nervous or even overheating, right? So, again, today we're talking about fear, but I want you to think that is sometimes animals can't control what's happening in their body. They just see a threat and their body starts this process of responding to keep them safe. Behavioral is they're making a decision and taking action. That's that fight, flight, fawn, or freeze. Okay. So, why? Why is this happening? And, just like people, not all cats will respond the same way to a stimulus. Again, part of it is genetics. Our genetic makeup, the way our bodies are created, is we need to keep ourselves safe, right? We need to keep surviving. That's how we reproduce. That's how we live on this earth. So humans do it, animals do it too. Our brains are hardwired to keep us safe. So it's a genetic thing that our body sees something, it views it as a threat. And again, those physiological responses start happening, and then we're going to see the behavioral response again. That's the actual body taking movements, an animal making a decision. Am I going to run away? Am I going to hide? Am I going to fight this person or am I going to fawn? So genetics definitely plays a big part of it. It's just the coding that they got when they were born, and that's biologically built into our systems. Socialization is another really important reason that animals might experience fear. So there's a really critical window that animals are supposed to start, meeting new people, meeting other animals, getting exposed to different things. So they're prepared to be their best selves, to go out into the world, to know how to interact with these things. And sometimes they don't get that opportunity. It's missed. Victoria, do you want to talk a little bit more about that before I move on to past experiences?
Yeah, I love the fact that we as volunteers are aware that the sensitive period for socialization is for kittens is 2 to 7 weeks. It can extend to 9 weeks. And during that period, when we gently expose the kittens to a new stimulus, whether it's new people, new sounds, a variety of foods, handling. When we do it in a real positive experience where their fear, anxiety, and stress isn't elevated, they can adjust to that new stimulus in just like a day. But when we get beyond that period, 9 weeks up to 16 weeks, if they haven't been exposed to strange new things, it can take longer for them to not be fearful of something new. Typically 10 days. It can take a kitten 10 days to adjust. So it's really great that all of us volunteers, the fosters, those that are working with kittens in the shelter, that you are able to socialize the kittens in a gentle manner and we're going to talk about threshold on the next slide, but keeping the cat's fear level below that threshold.
Yeah. And I mean, this is something we talk about with our potential adopters too when they're taking kittens home. It's critical, and even puppies, it's critical to expose them to that stuff. So that way, when they come up to something later in their life, they've dealt with it and it maybe isn't necessary, it doesn't trigger that fear response, right? So socialization is
Right.
really, really important part of it, and how we can maybe combat it a little bit or be an advocate for it. And then, of course, past experiences. So, in my history, I hear people immediately go to this when they see a fearful animal or a shy animal and say, well, I think they were abused. This animal was abused. They didn't have a great background. It could be, it definitely could be that maybe they did experience socialization and they didn't necessarily, they're not predisposed to being more fearful. Actually, I think that's something I forgot to talk about, but we actually know that parents, mom dogs, mom cats can actually pass hormones down to their babies while they're pregnant. And so if mom had a lot of stress on board and she was anxious, that's something that the babies as they're born, they might be more predisposed to being more of an anxious or nervous or fearful kitty. And that's because mom was while they were still in the womb. So that's a little bit of genetics and I mean, I guess past experiences. But when we're
And
talking about
experience,
past
sure.
experiences, we're talking
Hmm.
about that for the individual. And, of course, that can shape it. If an animal has been abused or neglected, so sometimes that's how, maybe we work on changing behavior, is trying to desensitize them to something that they experienced that maybe was traumatic in the past. So, yeah. Anything you want to add to that, Victoria?
Oh, I think you covered that really nicely.
Okay, great. So, can animals make decisions about how they respond to a stimulus? What do you guys think? This is where we're going to come to you. This is where we're going to come to the crowd. You can use the chat box. Just go ahead. What do you think? Can animals make a decision about how they are going to respond to a situation? Yes or no? Allie, you want to tell us if we're getting any messages in the chat?
Sue says yes. I also vote yes.
Does anybody think the
Anyone
answer is no?
else? Yes, I think. Because Patrick, Diane, yes, based on on the three you mentioned.
Okay. Yeah, the answer is yes. But also, there's a time where they can't. So let's go on to the next slide because we're going to get into that. The times that animals can't could be one of these reasons, one of these definitions that we have here. So our goal as a handler is to try to keep these definitions in mind, and whether that's a handler at the shelter, We're here doing positive starts, socialization, spending time with the kitties, whether they're fosters in our homes. Again, our pets. Some of our kitties, we don't understand why our animals are so fearful. Well, there are things we can do to reduce that fear, to stop that autonomic response, right? That physiological response that's happening that the cats can't control. When we do that, then we can start working on the behavioral response because that comes second. So, how do we help animals make a good decision? Well, we want to avoid things like trigger stacking. So, if you haven't heard us talk about this word before, that's multiple incidents that compile before the body can come back to baseline. This happens to human beings. It definitely happens to dogs. It happens to cats as well. None of us are immune to this. So, this is when we are extremely stressed because I'm going to just put it in perspective as a human. To me, that's always what makes it easiest to think about. I missed my alarm in the morning. I didn't hear it go off, or I forgot to set it, and now I'm running late. And then I'm hurrying up and I'm getting my cup of coffee. And as I'm running out the door and pulling the door closed, the coffee spills on my shirt. Shoot, now I have to go back in and I have to change my shirt because there's a coffee stain on it and I can't go to work with a coffee stain. And then by the time I get in my car, oh gosh, it's wintertime now. And I forgot to start my car. And now the windshield is iced over. And then I was rushing to work and then I got pulled over and I got a speeding ticket, right? And by the time I get to work and someone says, hey, look it, you're late again, and I blow up on them, it's because I have just been trigger stacked, right? I've had multiple stressful incidents all in succession before my body can come down and process that. All that cortisol, all those physiological responses that we can't control, they happened in my body. And no
And
longer was I able to make a rational response because I was over my threshold for stress that I could
and then what she
manage
does is
at the time.
someone comes up to her at work and says something sideways or upside down, and she's like, "Row!" And then she gets mad at them and yells. It's kind of
That's
like you get that final aggression from an animal too. They've had too much. They just can't deal with it anymore. Overwhelmed.
Yep, that's great. And so then chronic stress. This is another thing we want to be aware of that either our animals are experiencing. And when we notice these things, again, we can take steps to prevent or help our animals out of that stage. So, chronic stress is exposure to stress for an extended period of time. So, think about the shelter environment, right? Victoria, do you want to elaborate on this one?
Yeah, again, kind of like we talked about earlier, all those unusual things that the animal's exposed to, from losing, if they're coming in from outside, they're losing their person that has to relinquish them, strange sounds, strange smells, constant exposure to things that causes their cortisol levels to be increased, and then they don't get a break from it. And we're going to talk a little bit later about what we can do again to reduce that stress.
Yeah, I think of chronic stress so much because in the shelter, it's so hard for animals to get away from it. It's really hard for them to get that break. I mean, again, it happens to us humans. It's just repetitive. We can't break out of the cycle. It's hard to get that break. So that's how I think about it. Anxiety. So this is the anticipation of threats. A threat hasn't come yet, but we know it can come. So, and then we're like mulling it over and we're worrying and the constant worrying and trying to prevent that threat from coming or constantly scanning your environment for threats. That's anxiety. Again, a lot of people struggle with this. Sometimes we need to seek help from therapy. We might need medications for it. We might just need to talk about it with a friend, come up with a plan of action. But sometimes anxiety can be crippling. And this happens to our feline friends as well. Last, over threshold. So I know we've mentioned this a couple times already, but this is the big one. This is the point at which an animal is no longer able to cope. They are completely overwhelmed. So we talked about, can an animal make a decision about how they want to respond to a situation? Yes, but not when they're over threshold. Threshold is the point at which that animal can tolerate something before they react. So when they are over it, that's when we're going to have that big reaction, something maybe an animal can't control. So we talked about that Can they choose flight, fight, freeze, or fawn? Yes, unless they are over baseline or over that threshold. Their body hasn't come back to that relaxed state.
And I like to think about threshold. If you think of like a kitchen sink, the brim of your sink, when you're filling the sink with water, that's the threshold. So as you keep adding water and water, that's equal to those stresses, the things that the cat is feeling overwhelmed with. They're exposed to new people, they're exposed to new sounds, barking dogs, rough handling, and that water just keeps getting higher and higher in the sink. And once it hits that threshold, it's going to pour over the edge. That's at the point where the animal's no longer relaxed. They're, with the FAS score, they're going to be a 4 or 5. Again, you're going to see like that cat in the first picture with the dilated eyes, the tucked in. If they feel like they can't escape, they might get aggressive. We're going to talk about that in the next slides too. And lunge at you to try to get that fearful thing to go away. But when we talk about that threshold, we can pull the plug in that sink of water with all the stress by the things we do with the cats in the shelter. We're going to talk more about that. But as we pull that plug, those stressful things are going to just leak away and you're going to be lower and lower. That way, when they're exposed to more stressful things, that water level can get up without them feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah. And that brings me back to that responsibility slide, right? We all have that responsibility. The animal can't necessarily always bring themselves out of it, right? If we talk about the shelter environment or these stressors, again, some of it's out of their control. So we are responsible for keeping an eye on making sure that we are always helping empty that sink. Keep emptying it because we don't want an animal to ever go over a threshold because then again, that's when they're not thinking rationally and usually accidents happen or an animal does something because they just need to keep themselves safe and then they're just responding. They're not thinking. Okay. So let's practice. What body language might you see that tells you that a cat is experiencing stress? Okay, go to your chat box. Go ahead, type in your answers. So we're looking specifically for body language. How can we tell when a cat is experiencing stress? Allie, if you can be so kind to help us manage that chat, please.
Yep, I don't have anything yet. Think about ears are flat, wide eyes,
What do we
hair
see?
raised on hair raised towards the back. The face is tense, crouching down, tail tucked, whiskers spread, frozen.
Yeah.
Okay, got
Those are
some good
great.
ones.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, those are really good. So, again, our responsibility as a pet owner or a foster parent or an animal handler at the shelter is we constantly need to be scanning the animals and reading their body language. That's the way they communicate to us, right? Yes, they meow. Yes, they sometimes vocalize, but we don't always understand what that means. Sometimes we can tell when a vocalization means stress, right? But usually that's based on other body language too. So keeping an eye on those dilated pupils, watching the position of their ears, looking if that body looks neutral and relaxed, or if it's tight and coiled together. Are they at the back of the cage? Or at the front of the cage? Are they looking curious and wanting to sniff you? Those are all really, really important things for us to do. And it's not enough to look once. We have to continue looking throughout the day or when we make a change in that animal's environment. Anything that we do, right, is a stimulus. That's a change. And so that animal's body has to decide what are they going to do with that stimulus. And again, depending on the environment or that animal's past experiences or their socialization and their genetic makeup, they might see something and not, oh, a paper just fell on the floor. That's not that's not a scary thing. No threat there. But maybe a litter pan clangs on the floor. Well, that's really scary. It's a loud noise. I've never heard that before. Maybe not for every cat, but if they didn't come from a noisy household, Or what about a foster home and I don't know, guests come over and they lived in a household before that didn't have a lot of guests or they're easily triggered, and it takes them longer to process and come back down to baseline from something maybe that happened earlier in the day that just caused a little bit of a physiological response that they couldn't control. So we don't want to trigger stack those animals. So just things to think about. Can you guys, any of our viewers or listeners, can you give us examples of what trigger stacking might look like? That could either be the home environment or in the shelter setting. Go to that chat or come off mute. If we have some brave souls that want to come off mute, if you raise your hand, or I can't see you right now, but if you come off mute, Allie will help us navigate.
Yes, I can think of one. I'm thinking environmental, when we have our temperature changes in the shelter, when they're very rapid. I know that can definitely affect their stress levels.
Okay.
I have one, an owner surrender and everything that that cat has to go through. They're, put in a cage and they have to get an evaluation. They have to be evaluated by shelter med and just on and on and on and on until they can actually settle in.
Good.
Very good.
That's a good point you made too, Sue, about settling in. Often it takes 2 or 3 days for a cat to adjust to the shelter environment. So we want to make sure we don't label any cats mean or, they're um, spiteful, because it just all these new environment, all these things in their environment that are new, it could just take them 2, 3 days to adjust.
Yeah.
Diane also says a noisy cage door. That's definite, especially if we're not being very careful with opening and closing it nicely. The latch, new cats in the room. So they might be used to the residents that were already in there. And then we introduced a male cat, tomcat, that's spraying every 5 seconds, right? No, the noise in the room could possibly be from cleaning or another some teenager cats that are just doing the parkouring around their
Yeah,
in the inside of their cage, bouncing all over it. An
those are really,
illness, an illness is definitely a
true.
fair point.
Yeah.
The cat's not
Those are
feeling
all
very well.
really, really great comments there. Yes.
Yeah. So again, it's not necessarily just one of those things. One of those things could cause fear, but when all of those things are stacking on top of each other, especially in quick succession, which if we think about it, that's why I love to see the example you gave, how intake for an animal, bam, 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 bam. Okay, now you're in a cage. Good luck to you. We expect you to be a normal, happy cat. Probably not going to happen, right? And the likelihood that if someone goes in there and an animal goes over a threshold is a lot higher, right? There's a higher risk for that to happen because it takes time. Like Victoria said, sometimes 2 to 3 days for an animal to be able to come back down from that and feel adjusted, right? So every animal's ability to cope and adjust is different too. And the length of time is going to vary from animal to animal. So great. What about chronic stress? Honestly, I think we answered the same thing. Are there any other different examples? We talked a lot about stuff in a shelter environment. What about chronic stressors in a home? What might that look like?
I have one. When my lawn service comes in the summertime to cut the grass, and the machines are just really, really loud, even though the windows are all closed.
Yeah,
That's a
that's a
great one.
great. Yep, happens every day. Not every day, but could, depending on your neighborhood. Everyone can have a different day,
Mhm.
but they just keep on
In
coming.
my community, the first Saturday of the month, the sirens go off, and they're just a half a mile from my house. So I'm usually ready when that's going to happen. I've got treats or play, and when it's like the sirens are going to go off, I don't know how this cat's going to react, and start working with them so that they have a pleasant experience associated with that loud noise, so that they don't continue to have trigger stacking and chronic
Mhm.
stress. Yeah.
Also, if family members come over to visit, especially if they bring a pet along with them. That can be very stressful. Same thing with children. If a cat's not used to dealing with children and they bring small children with them, the children are not used to dealing with a cat or socializing with a cat and not knowing all of the rules to be respectful, that can also be very stressful. Um, I have a answer in the chat. Families going through a crisis, like lots of yelling, loud voices within the household. So that's
Mhm.
definitely a good example, or
Fabulous.
a
Yes.
domestic abusive situation.
Yes.
That's great. Yeah. We talked about visitors coming by and causing stress, but sometimes it's the family that's there themselves. Like, not all animals are like, yay, I live with children and I get to play with them all day long. Remember, some animals are there and then children are born into the family. And so that becomes a chronic stressor because the child doesn't go away. The child lives with them all the time. I've definitely experienced a cat of my own where I would travel away for a weekend and the cat would have a behavior reaction after that. It would literally go to the bathroom all over my bed because it was had so much anxiety and stress because I was gone and now the kitty needed to be independent for a couple of days alone. So, again, these are things that are chronic. They happen all the time. The animals can't really get away from them. So it could be a furnace in a house that constantly turns on and makes noise, especially in the wintertime. And or it could be an AC unit in the summertime. They're constantly happening. They live with another animal. I've had cats that love each other. They're best buddies. They snuggle, they groom. We have cats that just coexist. I know people who have cats that just coexist. It doesn't mean the cats are fighting all the time, but they definitely have scuffles from every now and then because this cat is, the one that rules the roost, and this cat's a little bit more shy and less confident. So those are chronic stressors. It's something that the cat can't ever get away from. It's part of their daily life. It's never going away. That's a lot to live with. It's a lot to manage, right?
I
So
have a,
next, go ahead,
I have a
Allie.
couple more, Jen.
Sure.
Definitely grooming. We didn't even talk about this. So clipping
Mhm.
nails, that can be really stressful, especially if they haven't been exposed to that as a kitten. But Barb says that she gives a special treat afterwards, but it takes time to build that trust, right?
Yep.
This is a one definite example of it, a death of a feline buddy in the household. It
Great
also could be a dog.
example.
Sometimes dogs and cats bond with each other. So it could just be a death of a mate in the house. Yeah.
Great examples. So, next question. Are the stressors the same in a home environment versus a shelter environment? So, the things that cause stress, are they the same at the home in homes as they are in the shelter? You can come off mute or you can write it in the chat.
I think there's a lot more in a shelter environment. I think they can overlap. Some can be the same, but I think there's a lot more in the shelter environment.
Yeah. The answer is yes, they can be. But sometimes they're not. They can be the same, they can be different. Is exposure the same? You went to the next question. It depends. It really depends on the environment. But typically, Sue, you're right. The shelter, there's a much higher risk, a greater risk of chronic stress or trigger stacking because it's harder to get away from, right? There's less breaks, which is why enrichment, right? And we'll talk about this a little bit further on, but volunteer support, fostering, taking an animal out of the shelter, going to the home, a dog day getaway. Sorry, I know we're talking on cats. I can't help myself. These things are great because the shelter is such a high risk, such a high level exposure to stress. We're doing our best to combat that stress because it is more in the shelter environment. So great. Anything you want to add, Victoria?
I was going to agree with Sue how in the shelter environment, I just consulted with another foster organization where a cat was in a shelter environment where it had that particular shelter didn't have wonderful volunteers like all of you that went and helped with reducing stress that we're going to talk about in the next couple of slides. But that cat was in the shelter for a month, was shut down, did not engage with people, hid, was all tucked in. Another rescue came along and was able to put that cat into a foster home. And I also consulted with the foster that had this cat. Within a week, that cat, by behavior modification and enrichment with the foster, started engaging and met strangers, was put up for adoption in a week, and that cat was adopted the first time they were put on the adoption floor. So definitely there is differences, but what you all do as volunteers makes a huge difference in reducing that stress, pulling that plug out of that sink of water and letting that stress go.
Great. Okay. I think this one, is this me or you, Victoria?
The effects, that's me. Some of the effects we see from stress that's combined with those poor coping skills, we see medical problems from that increased cortisol level that we talked about. It can cause suppressed immune system, and we see it commonly in the shelter with, especially with cats that have been there a long time, upper respiratory tract infection, GI issues, low appetite, lack of sleep. And the next slide, we will talk also about unwanted behaviors. So we can see destruction. How often have we come in the morning and a kennel is in disarray, the water's tipped over, the kibbles all over the place, kitty litters all over the place, the towels, all bunched up. Those are the cats that are really having a hard time coping. And so they have that destructive behavior. But we can also see excess vocalization, pawing, that anxiety, that they're pawing, trying to escape the enclosure, urinating outside the litter box, hiding constantly, less affectionate. And the last one, talking about aggression, if the cat gets to a point where they feel like they can't escape, think about what is the function of aggressive behavior. Why does a cat hiss, growl, bat at you, lunge, or bite? The function of that behavior is to get, if they can't escape, the behavior is trying to get that thing that they don't like, whether it's a human or whatever, to move away from them because they feel trapped. So it's good for us then to realize that we don't want them, again, that when it gets to aggression, they're at that threshold, they're above, the water is pouring over the edge of the sink. So we want to make sure that we interact with the cats in a way that they don't get to that point. And we're going to talk about some more slides on how we're going to make that possible to keep their fear and anxiety low.
Yeah, and I just want to point out when putting this list together of these unwanted behaviors, something you'll notice here again, we see this in both a shelter and a home environment. So, again, no matter if you're supporting cats on site or if you're supporting cats in your home as a foster or even your own cats. So, again, stress plus poor coping skills equals those unwanted behaviors. That was my cat defecating all over my bed when I left for the weekend. For some cats, it's getting into things and chewing, urinating outside of the box. Sometimes it's behavioral reasons, right? It's not a medical reason. The cat is experiencing stress. And if we could just figure out what that stressor is, can we remove it or remove some of the stress, like Victoria said, to open up that plug and help some of that come down so the kitties aren't going to bubble over. Again, as pet owners, as foster parents, as volunteers, and even staff caretakers, right, for animals and for our feline friends, it's our responsibility to try to look at them, see the behavior, or not say, you're a bad cat. No, and I don't think most of us do, but it's like, what are we doing or not doing to change the outcome for you? You're not doing this because you want to be naughty. You're doing this because you're hurting inside. And what can we do to make it better for you? A lot of these things, these unwanted behaviors, again, aggression, most of the time, that's an animal who's not making a choice anymore. They feel like they are pushed past the point of communication and they're just reacting.
I love how you went into detail, Jen, about that. I do have a quick question that I think would fit lovely into that slide.
Sure.
Frank asks, why does the cat urinate outside of the litter box? Why did they choose to do that?
Oh, that's a great question. And it can happen for many, many reasons, and it depends why. Again, sometimes it's a medical reason, sometimes it's a behavioral reason. So if we're talking about behavioral, usually again, there are some stressor happening. And again, the animal is not necessarily choosing, I'm going to go pee on the bed because I'm going to prove a point. Eh, they're probably not thinking about it to that level, but they are acting out in some way. Their body is releasing something. It's like, why do the kids have a tantrum when they get upset? They don't have the coping skills to bring down the stress levels on their own. So they're just doing anything to help themselves feel better and potentially draw attention to the situation. So, not
And in
necessarily malice behind it, but drawing attention
right.
to something is wrong. Does
Yeah,
that make
no
sense?
malice behind their decisions. It's natural behavior, really. And
Yeah,
in the case with Jen urinating on the bed smells like her and her family, and the cat's just reaching out for help. It feels comfortable being smelling her in that area and urinating there. Also puts the cat smell there too. And so it's like their way of asking for help, really.
yeah. That's what the way I look at it. It's like they're crying out for help. Something is wrong. You can help me. And look, I need your attention.
And also with urinating outside the litter box in the shelter environment, it can be a lot of things. Again, we talked about medical. It could be that the type of substrate the cat doesn't like. It could be that the box is too small for the cat. All of those things are stressful to the animal. So urinating outside of it also will put the scent of that animal in their enclosure area. So they smell like themselves in more of the area.
Yeah. I've had cats urinate outside the box because they're arthritic and they can't climb into it.
Yep.
I've had a cat go outside the box because the box was the entrance. It was a covered box and it was facing the wall. I've had it where the box wasn't convenient for that animal. I've had it where the box was close to something that was too noisy or something else that was causing stress. So it was too fearful to go to the box. Um, the reasons again, it's that puzzle. It's up to us to start trial and erroring and figuring out how can we reduce the stress, because usually if the behavior is there, something is wrong and the animal needs your help figuring out how to fix the thing is wrong so they feel better, so the unwanted behavior goes away. How do we help a kid stop temper tantrum? Is we teach them coping skills and we help them find solutions so that way they don't get to the point, right? Either where they're over their threshold or they have the tools to help prevent them from getting over threshold, or they can solve their own problems so they don't go over threshold. So kind of thinking about it that way. I know that's a little vague, but Frank, if you have specifics, we could always follow up more after the meeting today.
Thank you
All
for
right, so
clarifying.
reducing stress. This one's me. So, in a home environment, this is kind of that problem solving thing that I just talked about. The first thing we can do, and it can be hard, but we need to try to identify the problem. If we're seeing an unwanted behavior, there is a problem. The animal is experiencing something that is eliciting, right? We talked about that, the fear response. So they see something as a threat or something doesn't feel good. And so their stress bucket, their kitchen sink is filling up and it's pouring over. So what do? Is we got to start looking around and figuring out what's causing that stress bucket to fill up and what can we do to release some of that water so the pressure goes down. So identifying the problem, what could it be? It could be a medical condition. So we just talked about urinating outside the litter box. Sometimes animals associate the pain, if they have a medical condition, with a litter box, because every time they go to urinate when they have crystals, ouch, it really, really hurts. Okay, I'm going to try to go to the bathroom somewhere else because it doesn't hurt there. So usually that's the first thing we tell you to rule out if we're seeing litter box issues. It could be environmental. So again, do we have another cat that is bullying the kitty in the home? Do we have, oops, I'm jumping ahead. We got children and other pets here. But, environmental could be, again, we talked about the noisiness. Maybe there's a dog that lives next door that's constantly barking. Well, shoot, that's really hard to get rid of. We probably can. It's probably causing chronic stress. We're not thinking about it as a human being because it's just dog barking. We learn how to block it out. Maybe the cat didn't. Is there something else we can do to block out that noise? Can we replace some other positive things in that cat's day that are going to help bring, again, release that pressure? Maybe it's enrichment that we can do that's going to take away a little bit of that fear and help recharge some of the battery that's, being used up by that barking dog. So again, after we identify what the problem is, how can it be eliminated or how can it be reduced? It depends on what it is. Playtime, right? So let's bring out our notebooks. Let's think about the things we've learned in past virtuals. Enrichment releases stress. Time with people can release stress. Playtime. I don't know, lovely, delicious treats. What am I missing, Vicki? Help me here. There's so many
I,
different
the
things.
next slide covers a lot of those
Oh,
too.
I'm going too fast. Thank you.
There we go.
Okay, so this
And
is the shelter environment. So reducing stress here. How do we do it? We need to read that body language. We can add perches and hides. We can do in-cage socialization. We can speak softly. We can limit or do soft eye contact. So, we always talk about direct eye contact making dogs uncomfortable. We rarely talk about it with cats. It's the same thing. Here's a scary creature. We don't like to think of ourselves as that. We think of ourselves as a savior sometimes, because we're bringing things to them in a place they're trapped in. But also, direct contact with us, if they just need alone time, can be a lot. Offer treats, walk away, playtime, consent to pet. If you're not familiar with that, it's just a few scritches on that cheek, and then we stop. We take those breaks. So 3 to 5 seconds and then a break. 3 to 5 seconds and then a break. And a break could be anything from a couple of seconds to a minute. Some cats, petting is overstimulating. We say that bites come out of nowhere. Usually not. They can, but usually not. Usually there's steps that are happening. The animal's communicating with us beforehand. We're just not seeing those signs of stress in the kitty. Also, another consent to pet, I like to do this. I put my finger out and I don't approach the cat. I just hold it and tap on the bottom of the cage or whatever and encourage them to come to me. The cat has freedom of choice, right? They can approach me if they want to get my scent, if they want some rubs. A lot of cats will just bump right into your hand, bump right into your fingers if they want it. You don't need to go over and put your hand on them. They will come to you. Freedom of choice is huge, 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 huge in a shelter setting. And these also all work, by the way, in a home setting too.
yes.
Um, so what are some of your favorite things to do? I think I missed that on the last slide to ask the crowd, but what are some of your favorite things to do
I,
in the shelter?
I gotta say what my favorite thing to do. All of these on the list are just so wonderful, and we can take them all into consideration with every cat that we engage in. But I feel like playtime, if a cat is willing to engage, if you have a cat that I like to walk by enclosures and make some noise to see whether is a cat afraid of this, they back away and they hide, or do their ears perk up and they get wide and they come forward. If they come forward and they look like they want to engage, a cat going through that hunt sequence, chasing a toy, just releases endorphins and dopamine and serotonin, all these feel good chemicals that a cat has, and that whole sequence of watching. They don't always have to grab it, just watching is good for the cat, catching it, biting it, chewing it apart. So I like about the paper bag toys, they can chew it up and destroy it, just like dogs like to chew stuff up. Cats do that with their prey too. And also engaging with you like that, it also gives off oxytocin, which is it's like the love hormone that makes you bonded. That cat will start to really love being around people. So that's playtime is one of my favorites. But
I
Al, you
love
can
that.
read some of the ones that are listed here. Yeah.
Yeah, Sue says that she likes to talk to the cats or kittens. I do too. People think I'm crazy, but that's okay. And then Barb says she loves to play soft cat anxiety music for the level 2 cats in the back. That's awesome.
Mhm.
And then she also asked if we could talk about catnip to help reduce stress and if we ever use any type of scent work for the cats as well.
Yeah, so I personally think catnip is great. I don't know, Victoria, if you have any thoughts on that, but I think it's a great way for a kitty to sniff something and then be able to engage and take the edge off a little bit on their own. We do need to be careful with it in a shelter setting, especially if we're working with adoptables or cats that are going to go and need to be checked out by the vet. Because what we don't want to do is give a kitty a bunch of catnip and then have them need to get out of the cage right away for medical treatment or to interact with an adopter and then there goes the claws, right? Because they can get overstimulated from it. So I love to do catnip like end of day, like a last shift, or with a
Yeah.
kitty that's kind of been long term and are overstimulated and you can't really get in the cage anyways to pet them because they just need to take the energy out on something, but we can't have it be human hands. So that's a good toy wand or rubbing toys in catnip and popping those in their cages, or even a paper bag with some catnip in it and tossing that in there, rolling it up. The cats will just crinkle all over that. That's such good enrichment. We've done nothing other than give them the tools and they do the work. And maybe we can even put a little sign on that, just had catnip at whatever the time, so we can make sure that someone's not going in there and getting a kitty that's all excited on
Hyped up.
catnip.
I think you stated that really well. Like any of these enrichments that are listed, we really want to look at the cat's body language and see, is it really enriching to them or is it making them more fearful? Same thing with catnip. There could be a couple cats in that enclosure, and catnip may get them so excited that they attack the other cat in the enclosure. So we really want to watch how a cat reacts to any of the enrichment that we have. But and also, when I'm working with cats too, I'm actually doing some training with some of the cats. So if someone comes by and is just popping in catnip all of a sudden my cat I'm working with is just like their brain is, on drugs, which would be great for the end of the day, like you mentioned, Jen, so that they can have that fun later. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So
For the
I think you just
second,
got to be careful on which kitties you give it to. But go ahead, Allie. I don't want to.
so the second part of the question was, do we use specific calming scents or do we practice scent work with the cats at the shelter?
So that's a great question. We have had some approved scents for cats before. I think they fizzled out a little bit because we didn't use them as much. Lavender is actually not one of them. It's more of vanilla. And I think we had an orange scent before that we could just spritz the air. And so you would just spritz the kennel, like not the kennel, but spritz in the air the kennel row that you were in. And then it was just something novel, right? Something the cats hadn't experienced before and they could sniff. I think we moved away from that a little bit and have went more towards, the calming sounds, or I also like to do the birds sounds as well because I think that can be stimulating. So again, you have to be careful. You don't want to give a really overstimulated cat bird sounds and then nothing to do with that energy in their body. So that's bird sounds and playtime with a wand. It's really good. Again, bird sounds right before we leave with catnip. Great, because they can hear the sounds and they can attack and they can chew and whatever. But I haven't done as much scent work. I do think we could hide treats. We have done that before in the tubes, put treats in there and they kind of have to sniff it out. We've done catnip and Easter eggs because they have the little holes, so the kitties have to kind of push them around and sniff it out. But I don't think we do it quite as much with cats as dogs, as we do with the
We,
dogs at the shelter. Victoria, is there
we
any
do.
research on that?
On what?
Scent work with kitty cats?
I
Probably.
haven't really done a lot with it. I know there are companies that sell like a variety of scents in for cats, but I haven't really done a lot with it. I know cats often also enjoy honeysuckle, silvervine, thyme. There's some different herbs out there too that a lot of cats enjoy. So, but I don't really. There's look at this long list. There's so many things to do that I just scent doing scent. I haven't really done a lot with. You know.
Yeah, I have to agree. Again, I tend to focus more on these because I think they give us more immediate results and work for more of a variety of kitties based on what they need. And we're so limited sometimes with things that we get in. It's not that I would say not any cats would benefit from it, but we've tried a little bit in the past and faded away. I will say we have done, this isn't really a scent, but a pheromone. We've done feel away and done some work with that. There's mixed results out there, data, if you look at the research. If we get it donated, we still use it, and sometimes we spritz it, but we moved away from purchasing it in bulk at the shelter and using it all the time. But if it's ever something that has come in as a donation, we save it back there. If it's something you want to bring in and use with the kitties, of course, that's something we wouldn't be opposed to trying. Just make sure you let us know that's something that you're using. And it can't hurt, is what I would say. Again, if you're not familiar with Feel Away, it releases the feel good hair pheromones for kitties. Kind of brings a little bit of that euphoric feeling of what they remember when nursing mom when they were a baby. So it can sometimes take away a little bit of that stress for them as well. But there's mixed data on that of whether it works or not. I think some people say it works wonders for my cats. Other people say no results at all. So
Right. And then Frank added that he allows cats that are super friendly that are giving the idea that they want to come out of the kennel, some time out of the cage in one of our interaction rooms, to play outside of their kennel for a little bit. But that should also always be designated for cats that are definitely showing signs that that want to come out of their kennel. We should never force that.
yeah, Victoria, do you want to add to that one?
Yeah, I was thinking that yeah, for some cats that is a great thing to do as long as they are showing indication that they want to come toward you, maybe wanting to come on your shoulder. This presentation is a lot about, we're talking about cats that are already stressed and have higher fear, and we want to reduce their stress. So for some cats, just doing socialization in their enclosure might be less stressful for them. Again, things like offering the treat, do a little eye contact, offer treat, and walk away. See if they eat the treat as you move away, because if people are being stressed, are their stressors, then having us move away from them is going to decrease their stress. But then they got a nice little treat that they might want once you're farther away.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. For a lot of kitties, it is stressful to get out of their cage. And so, if they are really showing the signs, of course, that's an option. But most kitties that are experiencing high levels of stress or are more likely to have a fear response due to stimulus, getting out of the cage, the actual physical touch and lifting and carrying, most cats don't like that. And that triggers a fear response. You put the blanket on them, even if you're going to burrito them, nails come out. They kind of like, ugh, they hunker down. So I have to agree with Victoria on that. I would lean more towards in cage enrichment. That doesn't mean that you can't open the cage and talk to them or do a little movement again, fingers or toy on there, but we want to go slow and a lot of movement, overhandling. Those are things that can cause stress for a lot of our kitties that are more likely to experience that fear response. So think about it. Read the body language. Again, kitties climbing out on you, good to go. Kitty kind of staying reserved. We don't even really train taking out of the kitties out of the kennel. In our first couple of positive start classes that we do with volunteers who are doing on-site handling, because most cats do best with enrichment or time with a human while they're in their cage. It's their comfort zone. So, how can volunteers help? I'm sorry, Victoria, I realized that last slide was you.
You
But
did great.
how can volunteers help? Education. So this is huge. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for everyone who is on here tonight with us for this virtual session, for those who come to our quarterly meetings, for those that are willing to share their knowledge with others. Victoria, thank you for being here to share your knowledge, for our mentors who are out there, for people who are just offering tips and tricks. I can talk on the foster page. Wow, I am just so impressed with the amount of support that you guys give each other on that page. It really is just wonderful. And then I see it on the volunteer Facebook page too. It's great. That is one of the best ways. The more we know, the more we can support the animals in our care or in our homes. Donate. So you can give treats to the shelter, catnip, carriers, scratchers, etc. Even if you are not the one specifically putting hands on an animal or supporting them while they're in care, these things do wonderful things. They can be used for animals in the shelter. I say carriers, I say scratchers, because even though we might not have the space for them in the shelter, they go to our foster parents. These can make a huge difference in a kitty's life. Again, I kind of zoomed past that. How do we make a difference for kitties in a foster home? Well, there's a lot of different ways. And we're actually working on some upcoming virtuals and courses on that for our foster parents of how to make a difference for them. But setting up the space correctly is huge. So we said perches and hides and scratchers and, treats and toys. The cats just want to be a cat and they need their time and their space to adjust on their own. So these are things that we can give to them so they can, have that same level of comfortability in a home that's maybe not familiar to them right away. Of course, you can volunteer on site. You guys know that most of you are here. Positive Start, kitten care, shelter care, enrichment prep. All of these things have great impacts. Again, you may not be directly doing a thing for the kitty, but you're either helping take something off the plate for those that are, so our staff can have more time, or you are doing something to improve the quality of life. I've had people tell me, I really don't feel like I'm making a difference when I tie cat knots and I put them in a bin and shake them up with catnip. You are making a difference because there is more work to do in this type of field than can ever be possibly done. If it weren't inhumane, humans could work 365 days a year, which we already do, but 24/7 caring for animals. It's just not realistic, right? So every time we do some of this work and we can just go to a container and we can put something in a cage, we're making it better for our animals and for the people that care for them. Spread the word, be an advocate. Maybe you want to come and join us on one of these virtuals and share your tips and tricks. Maybe you just want to participate in the chat. Maybe you want to come to one of our tabling events. Maybe you want to share our adoptables on our social page. Maybe you want to come out to a tabling event and talk about Michigan Humane and your experiences. Maybe you want to promote adoption. So many ways. If you are able to think it, you can probably do it. And if it doesn't exist yet, but you have an interest in supporting the animals in that way, or staff or other volunteers, please reach out to us. We love to get creative and create new ways for people to give their skills and talents to make a difference in this world. Definitely remember to be respectful. We talked about this a little bit already, but always consider things from the animal's perspective. Even the best intentions, when we have them, if we are not doing a good job of reading that body language, putting ourselves in that animal shoes and thinking, gosh, if I was shaking like a leaf, what would I want? Usually, most people, when they are shaking like a leaf, don't want a big crowd of people to come over and soothe them. They need a breather. They need a chance to do it and figure it out on their own. Some people, yes, they like the attention. They want someone to talk with, but it's one-on-one. It's slow. It's at their pace. We don't force it. So we need to remember that from our animals too, and choose things that are lower impact, that aren't going to trigger that fear response and aren't going to trigger stack. Because sometimes that's the mistake I see is we're forgetting to put ourselves in the animal shoes and we're accidentally trigger stacking because we don't know what the last 5 people who interacted with that cat did before we got to them. So I think this list, it feels very long. This is not everything on there. So again, keep the ideas coming. We would like to hear from you if you have more, but this is just some of the ways that we've pointed out that you can make an impact or be that advocate for our kitty cat friends.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. I really want to commend all of you for the work that you're doing, either fostering or the work in the at the shelters or at the events. You're all making a big difference.
Yeah, we could not do this without you. You hear us say this at the end of every presentation. It definitely takes a community, and you are a part of the Michigan Humane team.